Welcome to Out with Dan, the podcast that spotlights and examines the voices of LGBTQ+ authors, characters, and our allies. Together, we lift our voices and we tell our stories. I'm Dan White. Join me as I chat with this week's author. Thank you and welcome back to Out with Dan. I'm so excited to have C. Travis Rice, his pen name for Christopher Rice's new gay series. Sapphire Sunset is the first book out. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you for having me, Dan. It's great to be here.
Oh, I'm so excited. I was telling you just before I hit the record button that I'm a big romance fan, and this romance was so sweet, and in a couple of places was very, very steamy, and I enjoyed that as well. So how did you enjoy writing romance?
Oh, I loved it. It wasn't my first romance, but it was my first full-on gay romance. I had written a kind of across the spectrum a few years ago. It's mostly novellas for the same publisher, actually, as this, Blue Box Press and 1001 Dark Nights. But this was the first time I was doing it with two men, and nobody was a shapeshifter, and it was there were no magic candles or spells. There was nothing. It was the first non-paranormal storyline I had written in a while, and I forgot how much I love to just dive into interpersonal relationships. But to do it with two men trying to build a relationship was not something I'd ever done. I'd written a lot about queer characters of all stripes, but building a relationship, that was very different. Everything I had done previously with any kind of gay couple was in service of a thriller or a mystery, right? And so the relationship always had to take a back seat. This was completely new.
It was refreshing in the fact that I felt like both of these characters I adored right off the bat. They came with their own background. All of us do. But I found that they were fully capable of standing on their own 2 feet, and their situation that brings them together more than one time it's a human situation that happens. But I love the fact that these were two characters that you could root for from right out of the box, Right. Was that easier or harder to write? And I ask these questions because I think romance has a different vibe to it than most books, at least in my experience. And so I'm wondering what the romance portion was. What excited you about these two main characters?
It's really, I don't want to say it's easy, but it comes more easily to me as a writer to make characters that are easy to root for when they're trying to save the world or trying to save their town. It's a different thing to root for two characters who are trying to get a relationship together, because if you don't write it well, it just looks self-indulgent on behalf of the characters, right? And so I think a lot of romance writers go for the relatable, right? They want to put heroes and heroines out there that you can deeply identify with. And that can divide up the audience into different segments and different subgenres and whatever. Some people identify more with contemporary, and some people identify more with shapeshifters because they feel like outsiders. So that's all well and good. But I think to bring you two men that you can root for, that you actually want to end up together, is challenging. And I'll tell you, I think this is a potentially controversial thing to say, but I think we're just now starting to see an increasing number of queer men reading male-male romance, or what has always been called male-male romance. And I think for a while there was a block there, because for some were just reflexively dismissive, as I once was, of reading anything that was not written by a man, right? Or was written by a cisgendered woman. Right. And I got over that by reading a lot of it and seeing how authentic and resonant it was to me. But there's a lot of work out there that just writes about two beautiful, perfect men finding each other. And for a lot of us queer men, that's no different than taking an anxiety-producing walk through a trendy gym in Chelsea or West Hollywood. It's like, we'll go to that place of, why do I need to see somebody for whom everything else is already working out, work out again? And I think it would be the same if you were talking to a straight female romance fan and said, if all the books you were presented with in romance were about Victoria's Secret model trust fund babies finding the man of their dreams, you might not be able to relate either. So I tried to layer in with these two guys some things that were fundamental to their identities as queer men that we're going to potentially keep them apart if they
Yes.
weren't addressed. And I don't want to, you know what I'm talking about, but
I
I don't want
do.
to spoil
I
too
do.
much. But and to deal with some of that reality, so all of that was, to answer your question, that was pretty challenging to get that all in there and to do it in a way that didn't feel like a lecture.
I'm glad you said that. And I asked the question for that specific reason, because I agree with you that I think that sometimes we read things and to me it can be too easy.
Mm-hmm.
Or the people they need fixing so badly they have to come together to make a whole. That works, I guess, if that's what you want to read. It's not necessarily what I want to read. I stand on my own 2 feet. Love would be an added extra. Yes. And that's something to work for and to fight for and all that. But sometimes when me personally, I don't feel like I need someone to complete me. So that's the way I felt about your characters. I thought that their coming together was fantastic, but they didn't need the other to complete them. You know, they came with a lot of strengths, which was so important to see. And they also came with parents that loved them. Their parents were different, but they loved them. And that is always a beautiful thing. I was fortunate. That's the way I grew up. I do realize not everyone grew up that way, but I do like to see that part of life represented.
Yeah, I agree. And I had read a lot of gay romances where the families were the obstacle. And there is, in book 2 in this series, which is coming out in September, Sapphire Spring, there is a parent who is very much an obstacle. But I don't want to do it every time out. And I don't want to read it every time out either. And I think there could be a tendency in a lot of queer romances to really front load a lot of homophobia up front, like a lot, and more than I want to read in a romance. And I think a lot of it's well-intentioned on behalf of the writer, because they want to show they've done their homework and they're not making it too easy, like you said. But at the same time, it would be like if every straight romance began with an act of sexual violence against the woman. It's like, I don't want to read about a gay bashing every time out, or a hideously homophobic relative. But that said, the second book in this series is going to deal with those issues head on. But that will kind of be the book that deals with those issues. So you can skip it if you don't want to read it.
Well, no, I won't skip it, because I enjoyed this one so much. And I already know a little bit about what's coming in September from the back of this book. So I'm like, yeah, no, I'm in for it for sure. And just so everyone else knows, your book does have homophobic characters or people who do homophobic things. They may not be evil at the core, or they may be. So these two fellows, Logan and Connor, don't just skip down the street happily ever after. They have obstacles they have to deal with. We all have obstacles. So, but I thought you did it in such a nice way that was able to honor the families and the characters as well.
Thank you.
And then, of course, I loved Donnie and his profession. I love
Donnie.
Won't give that away, but I will tell you that there's sort of a line in the book where Connor sees some of the new security guards, and he feels like they're familiar. And I laughed out loud. I was like, "Oh, I suspect they might be familiar." So
there is a lot of Donnie and that world in book 3, which will be out in March.
Oh, my
goodness.
So
and you're the second person in a few days to bring up Donnie to me. Donnie is really one of my favorite characters. In fact, I tried to put Donnie into book 2 and it didn't work. He just wasn't integrated into the story enough. The thing about this series that I think is important to tell people, particularly if they don't know how romance series are typically structured, is that every book really is a standalone. Every book will be a different love relationship at its center. And so Donnie is far more tied into one of the heroes of book 3, who's a completely new character that you don't meet in 1 or 2.
All right. I like it. I like it. I will tell you that I guessed wrong, because I actually thought Donnie was going to figure in. I thought I had just knew exactly what the romance of book 2 was. And I guess I was wrong.
You're wrong.
And that's
red herring.
I like being wrong, because that keeps me focused. I think, with romance and mystery, you get sort of, in my estimation, you get sort of the same thing. You want to think you see where it's going. You also, I don't want to be fooled. I don't want to get to the end of a book, which there was one 2 years ago that I will not mention because it's very famous and being made into a movie. And the ending made me nearly throw the book against the wall.
Really?
I got 90% through the book, or 95% through the book, being fooled. And I did not like that. So
no,
I'll discuss it with you afterwards.
Yes, please. You'll have to email me the name.
So, but to say that, I think that in a romance, in a mystery, you take turns, you take twists. You can be fooled by something as long as I'm not shook to my core by being fooled. So
right.
What happens with Uncle Rodney was something I might have seen coming. And as it progressed and then how it ends up, things change. And I liked that. I thought you did a great job with that character.
Thank you.
And I also thought, see how to put this. So the mom, so the dad and the grandfather are figure into the beginning of the book, and it changes. And I enjoyed that. We changed some baggage in that part. And of course, the mom, of course, I just love her and her yellow.
Yes, canary yellow. Yes, exactly.
I noticed the yellow more than one time, and I liked it.
Yeah. I tried to write the ideal mom for Connor, right? Because I knew she wasn't going to be the oppressive force in his life. So who would she need to be for them to have a wonderful relationship? And it's like, yeah, because Connor is such a wild, sparkly little thing. She has to sort of bat him into place when he gets out of control, and lovingly so.
And lovingly so. And and the fact that you set the book behind the orange curtain was it was a nice choice. I think somebody in the book mentioned something about, towards the end when they're talking about weddings and they have not considered Orange County. And I thought, when I first started reading the book, I thought, oh, OC. It's pretty and clean, but I don't really see so many romance novels set in OC.
You don't. I think I went looking for them, and which is funny because I know a lot of romance writers set in OC, but they're not actually setting all of their books there. But to do the type of beach resort I wanted to write about in Southern California, it doesn't really exist in LA County, and it doesn't exist in Malibu. I think people who don't live here don't realize how, I don't know if hostile is the right word for it, but how rugged those coastlines actually are. I mean, well, Malibu is just all houses, right? The houses are cramped, cheek by jowl, right up onto the sand. The closest, Santa Monica has a wonderful hotel, or two of them, Casa del Mar and Shutters on the Beach, but they're really almost in an urban environment. They really are an urban environment, and they're big sidewalks and bike paths right on the beach, and it's part of what I love about them. But the energy is very different from that kind of self-contained island, without being technically an island, that you find at the Montage in Laguna and the Ritz-Carlton in Laguna Niguel. And I think because the atmosphere is going to be a traveler's environment, you're not too constrained as a writer by the cultural realities of Orange County. But at the same time, the book deals with a lot of those realities. I think the most important one was there was no way to do this series without diving into the gay Persian community there, because there's a big Persian community in Orange County. And I have many friends who were members of it and are currently members of it. And that's why book 2 is Nasser's book, and as opposed to, I wasn't just going to let him be the best friend off in the corner. He really gets his own story, and it dives into what he went through growing up in Orange County as well, and what the dominant mentality was, because it's still a largely conservative place. I think the sad thing is that Laguna Beach, in the passage that you just referenced, used to have a kind of humble artist colony, very queer vibe.
Yes.
Which has gradually been eroded, but it's been eroded, ironically, by, I think, the very gentrification that we queer people introduced to the area. It became a hot real estate market because we kind of fixed a lot of it up.
When we go in and clean it and paint it and make it pretty, everybody wants to buy it. And that's part of evolution. But I agree with you. What was it? The Boom Boom Room, Little Shrimp. There were all those places that were so cool to hang out. And, it could be a Sunday afternoon. And then, of course, getting back to Los Angeles was murder. But I made it back. Murder. Yeah, it was. I went to the Boom Boom Room once, I remember. And it wasn't the most luxurious or lavish place. But it was central. It was right in the middle of, I went back to Laguna Beach recently, largely on a research trip for the series. And it was like
wow, everything is so touristy, and I cannot envision drag queens hanging out on this corner.
No.
Yeah.
It's funny. During last year, I took a long drive down the coast I left from Long Beach and I went all the way down there. And I was struck by the exact same thing. I mean, the little boom boom room was attached to a little motel that you could walk down a staircase to the ocean. I mean, it just doesn't. I actually think a movie star bought the hotel as a private residence.
Is that what happened?
Yeah, that's what happened to it. So, or at least that was the story was told. So,
yeah.
But I agree with you, because you couldn't set this type of resort here in Los Angeles. You could, but it would have to be 100% fiction. So the really great thing about this is there are spaces in Orange County that are like this. And a lovely thing about Orange County is it's extremely clean. People take a lot of pride in living there. And so that, of course, makes a perfect setting for this kind of resort, because the family does take pride in it, and it's very important to them.
Yes, absolutely. And it's almost like it becomes a stage set where you can be anybody you want to be for a weekend. You know, what's interesting is as the series progresses, it will focus more on the guests, but the first 3 books are all really focused on the staff, different members of the hotel staff, which is, I think, the way to really give it life. But as I get into maybe telling shorter stories and novellas in the world, it's like, who are you going to be at Sapphire Cove for a weekend? Again, it's not entirely constrained by its surrounding environment, because the guests largely make up the dynamic of the hotel, and they're always changing over. But I think, you know, the sea caves that are referenced, the little crescents of beach, the mountains, the bluffs, you know, I think the thing that really struck me on my last visit was how close those mountains are to the shore. There's really not that stretch from Dana Point to Laguna. There's not a lot of land to play with. They're building ever more higher into those hills, but the houses are like,
right.
You know,
Precisely.
I'm not gonna live up there.
It is funny, because they're not here. It's a very different. That area is so cliffy, and it's beautiful. It's breathtaking. But you know, I don't hang out so close to the cliff. I'm a little, you know, dizzy sometimes. Really, I don't want to fall off. So,
no,
but it is pretty.
Absolutely. I need a balcony. That's my thing. And I'm not about getting in the water. During the same trip, my good friend came to meet me, and she's like, "Oh, it's so sunny," and I'm like, "It's really hot." And I'm like, she said, "That's a weird thing to say at the beach." And I said, "The type of beach that I really love is like Cornwall and the Crown, you know, where they have to scarf up and stroll along the cliffs, and maybe I'll buy that estate, just being pelted by rain and fog." That's really, if I'm going to have to do a beach full time, that's my kind of beach. But I also love being down and visiting that sort of sunny, sparkling landscape.
It is beautiful. It is beautiful. Well, I so totally enjoyed this book.
I'm so glad. Thank you.
I am just beyond thrilled, and I'm already looking forward to September. But once again, the book is Sapphire Sunset, and I will never be a model on Price is Right. I'm sure of that. So it's wonderful, Chris. Thank you so much for joining me. Do you want to share website, social media? Anything?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, you know, and the biggest social media thing I really do is a podcast with my brilliant best friend, Eric Shaw Quinn, who is also a New York Times bestselling author. And we put out new episodes every Sunday. TDPS presents Christopher and Eric, and you can find those at thedinnerpartyshow.com or on the podcast platform of your choice. And Eric is a great writer, and you should check out his books at ericshawquinn.com. And my Instagram, I think, is christopher.rice.writer. And I think that's also my Facebook. Instagram and Facebook are where I tag team the social media sphere. On Twitter, I'm less excited about. I don't want to be threatened all the time.
You know, social media is so wonderful, and it is something that must be managed or ignored. You know, sometimes
managed or ignored. I like that. Yeah.
I don't really think there's an in between. So
no, there is not.
Perfect. Thank you once again for joining me, Chris. And hang on for me just a minute. Thank you for joining me for Out with Dan, and see you soon. Thank you for joining me for this week's episode of Out with Dan. You can find more information about this podcast and its host at outwithdan.com, on Twitter at OutWithDan, and on Instagram and Facebook at GoOutWithDan. This podcast is hosted by Authors on the Air Global Radio Network, and the theme music is provided by bensound.com. Join us again soon for the next episode of Out with Dan.